Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation.
Hey, Gary.
John, how are you?
Doing pretty good. Looking forward to today's show. A lot of
Absolutely.
good topics to sink our teeth into here.
Yeah, I'm still digesting last week's show with Sandy Monroe.
There was a lot there, wasn't there?
Yeah, it's according to him, it's a truly electric future, and I think we'll learn more about that today.
Yeah, well, why don't we bring in our special guest, Mike Ramsey from Gartner Research. Mike, great having you on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here, John and Gary, and nice to see you both digitally.
Yeah. So, Mike, just so the audience knows, tell them what you do and what Gartner's all about.
Yeah, great question. So at a basic level, I'm an automotive analyst and researcher. My technical title is researcher, a VP director over automotive and smart mobility at Gartner. But what I do day to day is I do research and give advice. So Gartner is a large insights firm, more than 15,000 people work there, and it has its origins in IT and technology. But as the car industry has become more of a technology platform, the stuff that we do and the customers we work with are more and more coming to us to ask us about how all of those things that used to be province of the phone and the data center are now relevant to the auto industry. And so I give companies advice, so what should I do? What's going to happen? What is happening? And that's the easiest way to boil it down. But then, of course, we do research that supports that advice on, things like connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, like electrification and all the buzzwords in our industry.
Yeah.
So are these companies Fortune 500 companies? Are these supplier companies? Are these both? I mean, who are the people that you are talking with?
Yeah, and it's good to know about, Gartner as an entity. Our customers are everybody and their brother, right? So they're governments, they're local governments, they're major governments, they're small companies, they're huge companies. And it's across every single industry segment that you could possibly imagine. So in the auto industry, we're not allowed to talk about specific clients, but basically you can make an assumption that our clients are literally every single company of substance, in the world. We have, tens of thousands of customers. So it's, it's all of them, pretty much.
Well, Mike, I want to ask you about autonomous technology. I mean, it's one of my favorites. If you go back a few years ago, everyone thought it was right around the corner. It is happening both here and in China, not to the pace that everyone thought it was going to happen. What's your thoughts about autonomous cars? Are they really going to happen or what?
Yeah, I fundamentally think that we will continue to automate everything. And when we say autonomous, it's like, I've used this metaphor before. So if there are listeners that have heard me use it in the popular media, I like to use it. So sorry, but when we talk about autonomous vehicles, a lot of times the thought that is summoned and the vision summoned has been the landing on the moon or even the landing on Mars, right? We are doing a major effort to get to some very difficult to attain level. All right. In between there, the technology developed to get to the moon, of which a handful of companies can do and will get there, also supports a whole lot of satellite development, the shuttle spinning around the Earth, a lot of near Earth orbit, space that is being explored while we get to that big moonshot. So the AV development is very much in that bucket. Very expensive, very long term, very hard to get to the moon, and only a small number are able to commit to that and get to there. In between, we're seeing a huge amount of development in the auto industry and outside of the auto industry, and what I call adjacent industries that utilize much of the same technology. And and that development continues apace. So it's like there's this disappointment that we haven't gotten the 100,000 or million robocabs changing mobility. That's true, and it's unlikely to happen in the near term, right? It could take a long time. I use the example of the automatic transmission being introduced by GM in the 30s, and it wasn't really a common thing on cars until the 80s, right? And then it became very common throughout the 80s, and now, of course, the manual transmission is virtually extinct. With autonomy, it may be like that. As we automate an extremely important function or functions, we're going to take a gradual uptake, and it probably will be very difficult to have that moment in time where we, obviously say, okay, the human-driven car is dead. You know what I mean? It's going to be more like the automatic transmission, in my opinion.
So Mike, I mean, if we look at right now, basically, you've got cruise vehicles rolling around in the middle of the night in a very restricted area of San Francisco. You've got Waymo cars rolling around in the suburbs of Phoenix. And yet OEMs had promised us 5 years ago that by now there would be plenty of commercial services available to one and all. I mean, it was the problem harder than they had expected it to be?
I think that the problem was in the souls of many of the engineers who were working on the technology. There was probably the understanding that this would be very difficult to do, but from the executive level, I think that there was a real belief that because they made so much fast early progress, that they were going to be able to close that gap, right? The problem with automating is the complexity of the environments. I mean, this is stuff that is the complexity of the environments is unlimited. And being able to create a system that can handle all of the different things that can happen, it's almost unknowably hard until you get to that point where you keep saying, okay, are we done? No, well, there's a few more things that we can't quite hammer out. And then there's other things that have happened as well that sort of slow things down. The governments out there around the world have not really coalesced around what I call a done test, or when are you safe enough to operate? And if you are safe enough to operate, how do we characterize an autonomous vehicle? Is the driver a person that needs to be licensed by the state of Michigan? Or is the driver a piece of equipment that the federal government has to certify the same way it would with an engine? So it because of this problem with regulation, it also has basically made it very difficult for companies to, confidently put out their vehicles. But with this very extended answer, I think that there was a bit of an underestimation of how hard it would be. Certainly by the CEOs who've made proclamations.
So, Mike, what's your sense of what's going on? As Gary pointed out, GM Cruise is in operation in San Francisco. Waymo is in Phoenix. Baidu is in several cities in China. I mean, there is stuff happening. What do you make of those efforts, and what's it going to take to scale them up?
Well, I mean, okay, so you hit on the primary issue, right? When someone says, when are autonomous vehicles going to be there? Which, by the way, is a question I get asked all the time. It's like, they're already here, right? I mean, all you have to do is change the domain, shrink where they operate, and they're already available and operating, right? When are they going to scale beyond the spots that they have now? I have not seen, and there are companies like Mobileye that basically say their secret sauce is this scalability to move from one city to the next. That's what they think differentiates them from the Waymos and the Cruises and the other companies. But I have not personally seen an easy way yet for a company to say, okay, we've done this in Chandler, Arizona, and now we're going to do it in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and now we're going to do it in Dayton, Ohio. There is a lot of infrastructure that has to go into place. The mapping has to be done on, originally and then on a regular basis. There has to be a command center. There has to be a customer service element to it. You have to work with local authorities and and law enforcement. It's an effort. It's a real effort to duplicate right now. So I think we predicted a few years ago at Gartner, or maybe it was 2 years ago, that by 2025, we would have 100 cities that had an autonomous vehicle operating in them commercially. So that's what our view is over the next 3 years, that we'll go from the handful of cities that we have now to 100. So that gives you some sense of the scale. But what we didn't say in our prediction was how much of the city would they be operating in, right? I mean, that we can still be right and cheat by, understanding that they may only be operating in a small little quadrant of a city.
How many of those cities will be in the United States?
Probably, I would estimate that probably about a third of them would be in the United States. It's still probably over-indexed for our population, but a lot of them will be in China, and certainly some in Europe and spread throughout the U.S.
Mike, what's your take on Tesla then and its efforts in moving to robo-taxis? Maybe when does full self-driving become truly autonomous? What's your take on their approach, and do they have an advantage having so many cars out there that are collecting data already, even if they're not fully autonomous?
Yeah, it's a good question. One that we get, excuse me, one that we get quite a lot. I like many people, here's what I would say. The cars that exist on the road today, the Teslas that are equipped with the equipment that they have right now, I feel definitive, and I would argue it till the grave, that those cars will never be fully autonomous, no matter what. All right. They will not, cannot be. It doesn't matter. No one will convince me, and end of story. If you ask another question about their process, which is this iterative process using a large fleet to test all the different use cases, pull that data back in, and then make over time improvements to their vehicles to be able to achieve that, that's a different question. It's a strategic question about how they're approaching autonomy. And I think that there's a better than average chance that Tesla could be the first mass scale consumer autonomous vehicle, more than average. In fact, that's my expectation, is that they probably will, but it won't be with the cars that are out there today. There will be cars that have different sensors on them. They have different computers in them. They have different, algorithms that were designed for those, but using what they built on today. So I know that's a bit of a nuanced answer, but I don't think that their strategy is crazy. You could talk to me and ask a different question about whether it's safe or ethical or moral, but their way of doing it does, lead to results of iterative improvements that it's hard for the other companies to get. But
okay, then we got to ask the question, I'm sure everyone asks you too, can they do it without LiDAR?
I don't know the answer, but I think they'll end up with LiDAR, because LiDAR will become so cheap that they'll just put it on because it'll help them accomplish. So that's what I've told people. I think that they will end up with LiDAR in their car when LiDAR becomes a $100 sensor. And then they're like, well, we'll just put it on there because now we can do all that stuff and we don't have to spend $80,000 for LiDAR. The LiDAR is $100 or it's $150. So we're just going to put it on. And now we actually can do things that we couldn't do before. And now we've incrementally moved. That's why I was saying, I know that the cars they have now will not be able to do it. I know it. There's just
so what you're saying is that right now they have cars out there that are collecting information. This information is being aggregated, and it will then be used for the next generation of vehicles that will have a different sensor suite, and that will give Tesla a leg up. Now, does it give it a leg up on companies that are doing work in a restricted area, a la Cruise in San Francisco? Which strikes me, if there's any city on the face of the earth that has a better digital model, I would be shocked.
Right.
And so I mean, is that the play that Tesla is doing? And if that is the case, then Isn't that basically what Mobileye is saying? Oh, we'll just put a bunch of vehicles out there and we'll collect the data and we'll figure out all the edge cases?
Precisely. Yeah. So that is Mobileye's perspective is, this is why we can scale to new environments more quickly than everybody else. And they may have something to their version of reality. Now, there's a technical gap in my knowledge about being able to verify claims by these companies, right? I always say to people, I know what people will say, and I keep good track of that. My ability to verify that is pretty limited. So like, to circle back though, I do think that your analysis is correct. They have said, so they do run their autonomy software in shadow mode to essentially see how it would react given a situation, and then test that against, would that have actually prevented an accident? They do many things that I think are quite interesting. But it's also there's a limit to how much data can be collected. It's very expensive if you really want to collect a huge amount of data across a large fleet. And I think that the idea that this huge data collection effort that is such a huge differentiator between them and everyone else has been maybe a bit overblown, right? To me, I think that the bigger issue is that they have a faster way of testing their new software and how it's working across a giant fleet in many different instances, right? In many different environments. And then they can kind of say, oh, well, that's not working. We're getting a lot of complaints, or it's failed here a lot. And then they go back and can make improvements.
Mike, I asked you about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gary.
No, I was going to say that basically, Mike, if we go back to what you were saying earlier, it seems to me that there are three issues related to autonomous driving. So one is the technology, what we've talked about. Two is the whole legislative legal sphere that you said is globally really unaddressed at this point in time. But it strikes me that the third thing is economic. Oh, yeah. And I mean, what is your sense of that aspect of things? I mean, it's like, is this, solving a problem that nobody ever sensed as being troublesome?
Gary, you just hit on my absolute favorite topic when it comes to autonomy, which is, it's the classic, question about from Jurassic Park, right? Nobody asked not whether you could do it, but should, is there any reason to do this? Why are we doing this, right? The history of this technology. It was primarily defense-related technology. Way back into the early 90s, the Defense Department was working on autonomous vehicle technology. They had a program after 9/11 to try to turn 30% of the ground vehicles in the United States military to be fully autonomous. That's what led to the DARPA Grand Challenge, because their work with General Dynamics wasn't going anywhere. And so they said, well, let's try to kickstart this thing. And then it got kind of hijacked by Google, right? Google was like, no one's doing anything with this. And Larry Page thought it was cool, right? So he started up with this concept that, hey, this is going to make us safer drivers. Then the business model changed. Uber said, we need these because our costs for drivers are too high. That launched this big effort to, hey, we build autonomous robocabs. Not only will it justify taking the driver out, but also no one will own cars anymore. It'll change the surface of, the way that we move people around. This kind of rolled out of control from the original intent, right? Which is a military application that has very specific needs. Take people out of harm's way, right? It is the number one goal there. You're automating a function, a dangerous function, okay? Once you start to remove taking people out of harm's way as a very high need, then all of the other reasons for autonomy start to get a little bit more tenuous. That's why we're stuck right now with consumer products. They're not really safety products. They're like driver convenience products, because you can't even truly argue that these ADAS systems are safety systems in a purest sense. Automatic emergency braking, sure, but that's not what we're talking about, right? There's a big difference between automatic emergency braking and highway autopilot. Did I answer your question? I guess maybe a better way to say this is that there has been some studies that have done. I've yet to see a really good economic model that proves that there is any real benefit to doing this outside of getting consumers to pay for the technology.
So an additional thing they'll be paying for, another service
Right.
that they're paying for.
Even in, where you do see autonomy really, really benefit is in dangerous environments, like I said, environments where the operator is very expensive. Okay. So those two combined tend to go together, by the way, right? And autonomy works extremely well and where it's really hard to find the labor. So again, put it together. That's where autonomy works super well. Where was all autonomy research before it got hijacked? It was in Mars and lunar landers, deep underwater ocean exploration, and large, mining trucks in Pilbara, Australia, where there's nowhere to stay within 200 miles, right, of those big open pit mines. Autonomy is great in those environments.
So basically areas where you're likely not to necessarily crash into another human being or another animate object, and areas that are in some ways, bounded in terms of understanding of the space, like the pit mine or
Absolutely.
even the surface of the moon, unlike, downtown San Francisco or Detroit or Chicago, etc.
Totally. All those things are true, have been true, and continue to be true. If you look at the hierarchy of when things will happen with autonomy, you can pretty much go down the list from dangerous, expensive, complex, regulated or not regulated, and then commercial versus consumer. Those are the 5 things that I have a framework on this. And if you line up, if it's all those things on the first side, if it's expensive and dangerous and simple and unregulated and commercial in purpose, it's probably already automated or close. If it's all the things on the other side, then it's going to be a while.
Mike, we asked you about autonomy. What are your clients asking you about? What's the hot thing that they want to know about going on in your realm?
Oh gosh, this will shock you. You guys won't believe it. No, I'm just kidding. It's totally obvious. Almost all my clients are obsessed with electrification right now. I think if I had to say what the number one client call that I do these days is related to transitioning fleets to electrification. But the questions for me are not always like what you would expect, right? They are trying to figure out things like, how do I switch from a telematics system designed which is like takes data from the vehicle, right, on their big fleet, and puts it into their fleet management system and tells, gives maintenance information and odometer readings and, trouble codes. How do I do that with EVs that don't have ODB readers and don't have standardized codes and don't have engines and don't have, you know what I'm saying? So they're asking questions like that, like, where am I getting the data from? Who can actually help me get it off of the vehicle, right? Who should I hire to put in the charging infrastructure? And the people who are asking would be interesting to you, because this is what makes me believe that EVs will truly take off, assuming we can actually get the batteries and everything, because the companies are big companies and they're making big commitments to transition a lot of fleets that are quite substantial to EVs. We're talking 50,000, 100,000 unit vehicle fleets. once they start doing that, clearly that's going to have a pretty significant impact.
So just to be clear, that they're sort of interested in AVs, but that's on the back burner, and
Totally.
to the point of EVs, they're even getting to this granular level of, worried about interfaces to obtain information.
I don't get very many calls around autonomous vehicles anymore. I do get them, but they don't happen very much. Whereas 5 years ago, it was probably 30% of my calls. But yeah, I think that there are many different types of calls around EVs, but the volume of them is very substantial. And it's my client base, right? They're commercial calls, right? These are big companies with big fleets, or governments, and they're looking to transition their fleet to EVs, and they've set goals, but they're not so easy. Like what's out there, what's available, can they even get the vehicles? There are a lot of challenges for it.
So are you like everybody else? You see electrification coming far faster in the commercial sector than with retail vehicles?
If they can get the cars, yeah. I mean, if they can get the vehicles, absolutely. I talked to one company this week that has a fleet of 60,000 vehicles. You wouldn't know the company if I said it, right? They want to transition 35% of their vehicles to electric, trucks, essentially over the next 5 years. Do the math. That's not easy. I mean, can they get those trucks? 20,000 some trucks.
Well, for commercial trucks, over 14,000 GVW, the incentives are far more generous. You can get up to $40,000 per truck or bus or van.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the deal is great, but the availability is not so great, right?
Yeah.
So Mike, are you talking about, like, take this client, this unnamed client who's looking to make this transition to trucks now? Are these, let's say, pickup trucks that they're, delivery vans, those sorts of things, or are they Class 8 or Class 7 big trucks?
It's mostly larger, well larger than a pickup truck, but I would say everything in a van, like a Class 3 and above, vans and all the way up through Class 8 trucks. There's a lot of companies. Another company that I spoke to that really wants Class 8 trucks, but the availability is basically non-existent. And what is available is a lot shorter range. And then the charging for megawatt capable, DC charging is non-existent, or, there's a lot of challenges related to that. I actually talked to one company that is trying to hit their carbon reduction goals using a carbon scrubbing technology, because they can't figure out how to either obtain a long range truck, or, there's no way to do it other than just figure out how to suck the CO2 right out of the emissions system at great cost.
Yeah.
So does General Motors have and I hate to use the word, but brighter future with BrightDrop than it does in terms of selling electric Cadillacs?
I would say yes, for sure. I think that the commercial EVs that are available, the ones that have good range, are going to do very well. I just looked at, and I think GM will do very well with BrightDrop, if the services that they're packaging with them, as well as the battery has to live up to the range, that they are claiming. That'll be a big benefit. I just reviewed some work that a humongous company did. They did a pilot with EVs, and one of their big takeaways was that the efficiency of the EV, right, in their tests, like with 4 years of using it, was far lower than what the manufacturer said it was, right?
Yikes.
So,
yikes.
They were not super happy about this, and it made them nervous because, if you're buying a fleet for, say you're buying 30,000 of these vehicles and you need them to run the route, and they have long recharging times, it's very, nerve-wracking if you buy them and you find out, oh, I thought I was getting 200 miles of range, but I actually only got 140 miles of range, and that meant, da 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 da. So.
Wow, very interesting. Hey, look, we got to take a quick commercial break. Stick around. We got a lot more things to talk about. I know Gary's always got questions for what's going on in the industry. But first, a couple of messages from the sponsors that make this show possible.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
The future of Michigan is extraordinarily bright. We have such incredible assets, and I think more and more we're realizing how to put those together in a way that's going to help this state really help lead the nation as we go forward.
All right, we're back. Thank you, Bridgestone and the MEDC. And Gary, you've always got some good questions for us of what's going on this week.
Well, I want to ask you, John, in particular, and then Mike can chime in on this. So Dodge has announced that basically the Challenger and Charger, the 2023 models, this will be the end of what we've known, end of an era, and that Dodge will be transitioning to an electric future. So the thing I wonder about is whether people who have been enthusiastic about those vehicles with Hemi engines, are going to be as enthusiastic about electric vehicles, even if there's 126 decibels of fake sound coming out of the tailpipe.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think true gearheads are going to have a natural revulsion against battery power. But this is the kind of car that will deliver the kind of visceral, gut-wrenching experience that a Hellcat Charger delivers today. So I think some of them will grudgingly admit, geez, it's faster, looks beautiful. I mean, they nailed it from a styling standpoint. So I think they'll believe, I think some of those people will change their minds. And then I think they're going to attract a new generation of people to muscle car who are attracted to electric power and are not interested in piston power. And remember when Ford announced the Mustang Mach-E? The Mustang purists turned up their noses at it. They practically vomited on it. They hated it so much. It's outselling the regular Mustang. I've seen more than a few hardcore Mustang fans say, you know what? I got to drive one. This is a pretty damn good car. I want one. So I think the same thing is going to happen with the Dodge Charger Daytona. Mike, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm in violent agreement with you that I don't think that the people who are really into the Hellcat engines and the horsepower driven nature of those vehicles are going to like the idea of those cars being turned into an electrified platform. That said, they will be converted. I do think eventually everyone who drives electric vehicles, especially the performance ones, will be converted. Once the downsides of EVs are addressed, the range, the charging, and even the price, they're better cars. I mean, it's not even, you can't even argue it. They're fundamentally better cars. They drive better, they're faster, they have better torque, they brake better, they have lower center of gravity, they handle better. I mean, there's really not even a comparison, to be honest with you. So I think that you'll get people will transition over, but there's one little thing that I'm curious about, and I haven't heard anyone talk about, but there's a lot of culture around some of those cars, not as much the Challenger as the Charger, especially like in black culture with the Charger. And I'm curious to see if that carries over, with the new electric Charger, especially around Detroit and some other cities. There's a big following for this type of vehicle. And I don't know. I don't know if Stellantis has addressed that or if they're aware of it, if they're going to make, inroads, try to make inroads in that community. But I found this sort of like a less talked about, interesting dynamic of it.
Well, and I should add this: the pricing is going to be key. So let's just say, for argument's sake, a typical Hellcat or something like that is in the $80,000 range. If the electric one comes in over 100, stick a fork in it, it's dead. If it's about the same price as a Hellcat today, then I think they got a real fighting chance.
All right, so let me stir the waters here a little bit. Okay, so Mike, you're absolutely right. You put the accelerator down and this just goes zoom. Okay, very fast. 0 to 60 time would be amazing. But the difference is that pretty much if you're driving a Charger or a Challenger or a Camaro or a Mustang, that you are more part of the activity. Okay, even if you're have a paddle shifter rather than a manual transmission. Okay, and so the experience isn't just like being on a roller coaster. The experience is you are joined with the machine and doing something. That pretty much goes away with an electric vehicle. Okay. The other thing that strikes me is that if you look at the number of people that buy these vehicles, it's comparatively small. I mean, muscle cars are a niche.
Yeah.
And how sustainable is a niche of a niche for any company?
That's a great question. On the second question, I fully agree that, and again, this kind of goes back to what John was saying, right? I mean, some people are, for good reasons, are going to say, that's not the same as as it was before. That roar, that feel, the connection to the transmission, all those things are different in an electric vehicle. It's just not the same. It will be different, and it will be upsetting to a lot of people. On the other question, can these brands survive on a ever shrinking, niche, especially when you're seeing more and more niche new players coming in? I don't know the answer to that question. That's a tougher one. I don't know if, the Dodge Hellcat, Challenger can exist when you have Lucid Air supercar also coming in. Different clientele, but if I'm going to buy $100,000 electric car, I'm pretty much in. What am I looking at, right? I got 2 or 3 vehicles, so I think that there is some tension there for sure.
Except for one thing, Mike, I think there's a critical consideration here. Whatever Stellantis puts this Dodge Daytona onto, it's going to be a Stellantis platform that's going to be used on other vehicles.
True.
So, from the batteries, from the motors, from the inverters, from the platform, the suspension, all that stuff. Yeah. Stellantis is going to have way more scale than any of the startups do.
True.
Yeah, I think that's the only one caveat I had to add to what you're saying.
It's actually a really good point, which is and I'm not totally sure how this works out from a platform standpoint. Maybe electric cars are finally the realization of what car companies have been talking about for 20 years of these platform strategy and never really have executed it well,
Right.
Except for maybe Honda, I'd say, has done a pretty decent job at. Almost no one else really has done a good job at a platform strategy, but maybe with EVs, they will.
I think they're going to be forced to. I mean, that's pretty much what they're all looking at. I mean, if you look at GM's Ultium platform, it's exactly what you just described. And, it sounds like, Stellantis is going to go with 4 platforms, depending on the market segment and the size of the vehicle. But, 4 platforms are going to underpin their entire lineup.
Yeah.
All right. So let me throw some numbers out at you guys. So Morning Consult came out with some statistics today, conveniently enough for me anyway. And they asked consumers about whether or not they are very interested in purchasing an electric car in the next 5 years. Okay. So this would be the sweet spot that everybody's talking 2025, right? I mean, it's just like, ooh, we're going to have lots of these things. Okay. 24% of millennials are interested. 16% of Gen X and only 12% of boomers are interested in electric vehicles. So what do those numbers do to the planning at OEMs?
It sets their hair on fire is what it does.
I actually think that's about if those hold up, if that holds up, okay. Let's say it's half of what people intend, right? So, if we get 50% of that, then reasonably speaking, then by 2025, we'd be at about 10% market share of new EVs. We're at about 5% now. We think Gartner, we have an EV forecast by the end of the decade. US will be a bit over 20%, a bit higher than that of market share. Globally, it's going to be more like 35%, driven by China and Europe mostly. I think it's kind of sort of in line with what I was expecting. I am very skeptical that we in the US will be at 50% market share of EVs or something like that by the end of the decade. I don't even think it's physically possible, even if we wanted it to be. But, absent, let's just pretend that it was physically possible. I still don't think that there's any chance that it will happen here. The incentives, despite what was just passed, those wouldn't even come close to what the incentives have been in like Norway and China and other places to adopt an electric vehicle. Norway showed that you can do it pretty fast, but it's got to be crazy to buy a gas vehicle versus an EV. And we're not even anywhere close to that.
So speaking of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has those requirements written in terms of sourcing. I mean, what do you guys think about that? I mean, the thing that struck me, first of all, is the fact that after Tesla ran out of its credits or its the tax return that people got, people kept buying them, right? I mean, it's the product that matters.
Yeah.
And, I just don't think that people buy stuff because they say, ooh, I'll get money off. I'll get money, it's got to be more than that.
No, you're absolutely right, Gary. Good product at the end of the day is what this industry is all about. And there's nothing wrong with a car company that a great new car can't fix. We've seen it happen throughout history. And so that's what they're going to have to come out with. And having nice cars that are competent is not going to get the job done. You got to knock people's socks off. This is one reason why I'm so impressed by Hyundai and Kia with their latest cars. I mean, boy, they come down the street, everybody's head turns. And that's what it's going to take to break into the EV segment.
No, I completely agree. I would say I don't want to dismiss the act because I do think that it will. I mean, it definitely, the incentives do drive purchase decision, right? Like there's no question. And now that they're aimed at a lower starting price, the first thing that sticks out to me is that the most likely beneficiary in terms of a company from this EV tax credit is Tesla, right? I mean, not GM and Ford, although they have a bigger downside if it didn't exist. Certainly GM and Ford are going to, it's going to help them sell some vehicles, but Tesla has 80% market share of EVs.
Except for one thing, Mike, they're priced too high. They don't qualify.
Well, no, the Model 3 and the Model Y would fit in this category, right? And
and no doubt. Look, I'm sure Tesla's going to adjust the prices to make damn sure that some of those models qualify.
$79,995.
Yeah, but what I would say is that they're going to. What I think about the law that is going to be really impossible to meet, and maybe makes the tax credits worthless, is if you really do have sourcing requirements for materials that go into the battery in the value stream, going all the way down. Just forget it. Like we're not going to have that by 2024 or whatever. I mean, I think that's not even. Asia dominates so many of the materials that go into batteries, the refining capacity for many of the key elements that go into batteries. We can't just flip a switch and say, oh, we're just going to do it in the United States. That's going to be a 10-year process.
Right.
Right. So this is basically industrial policy that is encouraging people to begin
100%.
to put this stuff in the United States more than it is a deal for your next door neighbor to go out and buy an electric car.
Right. But remember, there's actually two incentives. There's a $4,000 incentive for the electric car that's
Right.
assembled in North America. Then there's a separate incentive that goes up to $3,750 for a battery that's made in the U.S. And to your
Right.
point, Mike, I think in 24, 50% of the value of the battery's got to be sourced in the U.S. And then that ramps up to 100% by the end of the decade. But so you still, even if you have a battery that's from China, for example, you still
Right.
can get a $4,000 incentive just for the car itself if it's assembled in North America.
Which is not nothing. I mean, it does make a difference. $4,000 is still $4,000. And it won't make all the difference, especially when we're talking about very expensive cars. One, that wouldn't qualify, but two, people who can afford a very expensive car it's not going to change their decision much.
No, but I'll
only
tell you
10,
where it will really make a difference. Down payment. If
Yeah,
you're somebody
right.
who's borderline and you can get even $4,000, you
Sure.
can work a deal with the dealer, say, hey, dealer,
Yeah.
chop it down. I get the $4,000. I turn it back to you. Boom. There's my down payment.
100%. I agree.
So this going back to Morning Consult, their numbers, and this sort of underscores what both of you have just said. So when they asked people why they would not buy an electric vehicle, 63% said price, 53% said cost of ownership, which puzzles me. 49% said range, and 46% said lack of infrastructure. I thought infrastructure would have been higher up on that list, if not at the very top.
I talk to people all the time and I get that same list of questions. I can't, or, same list of responses. I can't afford one. They're too expensive. And I said, you can't afford a $26,000 Chevrolet Bolt? And they go, it's only $26,000? They don't know. And then they say, well, where am I going to plug in? I say, the center screen will show you all kinds of places to plug in. Really? It does that? So there's clearly a huge education effort that the car companies need to step up to, because a lot of these questions can be answered very, very easily.
John, but would you really want a $26,000 Chevy Bolt or a $26,000 Accord? I mean, come on.
I want the electric.
Yeah.
I do.
One that doesn't show up on that list that I think is interesting. I was at a wedding in northern Michigan last weekend, and I was sitting at a table, and of course, when they find out what you do, everyone asks about cars, and EVs come up, and every single person at the table had a different reason why they had looked at EVs, and they had said we can't because. And it was like a selection of all these things. The one that was missing that I thought was most interesting, and I feel like it's also very relevant, missing from your list from Morning Consult was, the space. Like there aren't a lot of EVs that you can put car seats in that, are family vehicles, right? There are not a lot of options there. Now, some of the newer ones coming out maybe provide a bit better in that area, but it sells in the US. I mean, you're talking about 7-passenger vehicles, crossover and mid-size SUVs. That's a hot segment. It's important because if you have 3 kids or you have 2 kids in car seats and crap, that kind of vehicle is missing. So it's range, it's charging, but it's also, what's available. Like what are you offering?
So the architecture of the vehicles is not suitable for the lifestyle that many people in the U.S. lead.
Yeah, I think that's true. And
right now, those vehicles are on the way, clearly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that Volkswagen electric little minibus could be it could be a star, a family star. Not only is it cool looking, it actually meets the needs for a group that right now is sort of isolated from EVs.
All right, I think, look, a Chevrolet Equinox electric at $30,000 could be right the total sweet spot of the market for getting people to convert.
I don't disagree. If they, if they really can put out a vehicle, I mean, I'm very interested in that vehicle to see it come out. If they can deliver even close to that price, my guess is that it'll do pretty well. Although, the Volkswagen, it's not like flying off the shelves, their little compact SUV.
ID4.
Yeah, ID4 is doing okay. And I don't test cars like you do, John, probably, or Gary, but when I drove around, I thought it was a pretty nice vehicle. So I don't know. We'll see.
On the subject of infrastructure, which came in last on that list from Morning Consult, JD Power came out this week, actually yesterday, with a study that looked at people's satisfaction with charging, and level 2 charging went down 10 points. I mean, people are more frustrated with their level 2 charging. So on a scale of 1,000 points, it's down at 633. Perhaps not surprisingly, Tesla's superchargers came out as being the best. And the number that I found to be most fascinating is the fact that they discovered that 20% of people that drove into a charging area left without charging because the chargers didn't work or there was another type of malfunction. I mean, can you imagine that if you pulled into a gas station and you couldn't get gas and you had to, leave? It strikes me that this is a real sore point. And what is the obligation, or what can the OEMs do? They're all putting out this product, but if people are saying this is really a bad experience, I don't want to participate unless it's Tesla. How can they sell cars?
It's $1 million question. I'll tell you that I was talking to a company, one of the companies you know and love, about this issue, and they do not want to get in the charging business, right? Because that we don't do that, right? Like, why do we? I know Tesla did that. Blah blah blah. I don't know. Unless they can improve the consumer experience, it's going to be problematic. Excuse me. I think that they should really consider it.
One of our commenters in the comment section, this goes back a couple of months ago. I wish I had written down the person's name, but they said, why don't they just give all the money to Tesla and let it build out the whole charging infrastructure? And at first you laugh, but you know what? It would work. There's no question one of the core competencies and the key advantages that Tesla has is its charging network. Nobody else will do it, and they're going to suffer accordingly.
So John, what's interesting is that a year or two ago, I guess it was closer to two, you had that experience with the Nissan Leaf trying to get it charged when you took
my
a trip.
horror story, my electric car horror story, right?
Despite that, you're enthusiastic about electric vehicles. What causes you to think that way?
No, that's a great question, Gary. One of the things that appeals to me actually in these early days of EVs is it's like going back 120 years ago, to the very early motorists, where every trip you took was an adventure. You didn't know where you could get gas. There were no gas stations back then. The cars were highly unreliable. You had to have some amount of mechanical knowledge yourself. You had sneering people when your horseless carriage got stuck in the mud shouting at you to get a horse. And we're sort of going through the whole thing all over again today. So there's an element, pioneering, aspect to that appeals to me. But I fundamentally like the cars. I mean, and I'm sure you guys have experienced it. I just got out of the Genesis GV60. Terrific electric car. I got back into another one. I won't say what it is because it's like, oh my God, I've gone back to the 19th century. I mean, it feels just so old fashioned. And so that's why electrics appeal to me. Mike, you said it yourself. It's a better driving experience, faster, smoother. Now the key is EVs are not for everybody. If you can't plug in at home, you don't want an EV. If you drive long distances every single day, forget about it. If you've got to tow something, go get a piston engine. Better yet, go get a diesel. But if you can charge every day and you don't have a whopping big commute, electric cars are brilliant. And that's going to appeal to, I think, a significant part of the market. I'm with you, Mike. I don't believe 50% EV in America by 2030. I do believe 1 out of 3, though, 33%. I think that's achievable. And that would be roughly 6 million EVs a year. Guess what? At this shot in time, that's a big number.
Oh, yeah. I think that's achievable, too. You could get in a lot of the arguments about what would cause it to go higher or lower. And, we get in those discussions sometimes. But fundamentally, I would say I was a skeptic about EVs in the United States for many of the reasons why people have held off. But I'm starting to thaw because like I said before, the absolute demand that I'm seeing from consumer, but also commercial entities, the demand will be filled by car companies, and that will lead, hopefully, it will lead to a need to fix the charging problems, right? I can't envision that 20% failure rate is sustainable. Many companies will say, this is a market opportunity for us. If we have a 1% failure rate and they have a 30% failure rate, we are going to win all the market share, right? So I think that it's bad and it's a problem. It's also going to be a way that some of these companies are going to differentiate themselves. They're going to build platforms that are self-healing, that are, have maintenance, software-defined maintenance, and other things that are say, what, ours will always be online.
So, but these companies you're talking about, Mike, these are not OEMs. These are Electrify America, ChargePoint, what have you.
Yep.
So you think that there'll be a separation?
Fascinating. By the way, the how charging is and is developing is quite interesting. I don't know enough about the history of petrol stations to be able to look at it, but mostly charging has kind of had this really bizarre mix, right? Because you can own your own, electricity doesn't need refining. Anybody who has electricity can produce it or can charge there, but you can't resell electricity very easily in most states. So it's created this odd business model for charging. Plus it takes a really long time. It takes up space for a long time. So you can't really charge for electricity the way you would normally, right? For gas, because gas, you cycle through really fast. So that it's created an interesting dynamic of charging networks, private charging, semi-private charging. Now we're starting to see in our practice, companies talk about cooperatives, right? Where you own charging out there and it's split between 2 or 3 companies. Right. And that, they're trying to figure out how to manage this. That's a whole other interesting avenue that's going to pop up over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So I was talking to a woman a day or two ago who's an enthusiastic Tesla owner. I mean, she just is over the moon about this. And her husband went to some summer festival in a small town, and she needed to get some electricity for her vehicle for their ride home. And a municipality had a charge station, and the municipality was charging $10 just to use the charger. Think about that.
Right.
Revenue enhancement.
Right.
I think you could make an argument that fast charging probably should cost a lot more than gasoline. I know that would be unpopular, but most people charge at home. So, yeah. You can make the alternative argument that if you live in cities, you need fast charging because you can't charge at home. And that's a legitimate argument. But, so.
Yeah. Hey, look, guys, we're at the top of the hour. Gary, unless you had some other burning topic we need to get to.
No, I'm good. Okay.
We're going to wrap it up then. Mike Ramsey, thanks so much for coming on the show. Great conversation. Lots of things. We'll have to have you back because these are topics that are not going away.
No. Well, thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed it. It's great to see you guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Cool. And Gary, I know you'll not be around next week because you're out traveling, but there will be a show. And I hope all of you who are watching join us then. Okay, everyone.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.